In the soft amber glow of the Bluebird diner, where the scent of fresh coffee mingles with homemade pie, Emma Matthews moves with practiced grace between checkered tables. Her smile never falters as she balances 4 plates along her arm, though beneath that smile lies a world of quiet determination few can see. The ancient bell above the door chimes as dawn breaks over their sleepy coastal town, painting the sky in watercolor hues that Emma glimpses only briefly between orders. She's been here since 5 a.m., her 3rd double shift this week. The dark circles beneath her bright eyes tell a story her cheerful demeanor tries to hide. "Order up, Emma," calls Gus, the gruff short-order cook whose bark is far worse than his bite. She nods, tucking a wayward strand of chestnut hair behind, her ear, her name tag glinting under the fluorescent lights as she hurries to the window. When she reaches for her notepad, her fingers reveal the small burns and calluses that come from years of carrying scalding plates and scrubbing stubborn grill marks. These hands have known more work than rest, more struggle than ease. At table 7, a businessman barely looks up from his phone as Emma refills his coffee. At table 3, Mrs. Henderson squeezes Emma's hand in silent gratitude, recognizing a kindred spirit who understands that sometimes a cup of coffee and a kind word can be a lifeline when the world feels cold. What they don't see is how Emma's smile dims only when she steps into the back alley during her break, carefully counting tips and making calculations in a worn notebook. College textbooks peek from her weathered backpack, dreams deferred but not abandoned. Every dollar is meticulously allocated: rent, utilities, groceries, Liam's medication. Later, as the afternoon sun casts long shadows across the linoleum floor, Emma's phone buzzes. It's a text from her brother Liam. "Aced my math test." A genuine smile, different from her work one, spreads across her face. This is why she pushes through exhaustion, why she endures Mr. Peterson's complaints about lukewarm coffee, why she picks up every extra shift when her feet scream in protest. At home, their apartment is small but clean, filled with second-hand furniture and carefully tended plants. Photos of their parents, lost in a car accident 3 years ago, watch over them from simple frames. Emma has become both sister and parent to 16-year-old Liam, whose quiet brilliance with computers offers a glimmer of the future she fights for daily. As Emma soaks her aching feet in warm water, she reviews Liam's college brochures spread across their coffee table. His future is the North Star that guides her through the maze of unpaid bills and dwindling savings. Tomorrow, she'll wake before the sun again, put on that same resilient smile, and continue the dance of plates and pleasantries at the Bluebird diner. Behind Emma's smile lies not just struggle, but a fierce love that transforms her exhaustion into purpose with each new day. The evening rush at the Bluebird diner had just begun to subside when the bell above the door chimed with unexpected force. In walked a man whose presence seemed to instantly transform the warm atmosphere into something colder. Jonathan Miller, though Emma didn't know his name yet, surveyed the half-empty diner with disapproval etched into every line of his face. He chose a booth by the window, not bothering to look up when Emma approached with her customary warm greeting. His tailored suit and expensive watch looked jarringly out of place among the diner's well-worn charm. The scent of costly cologne cut through the comforting aromas of home cooking. "Coffee. Black," he instructed, without meeting her eyes, his fingers impatiently tapping on his gleaming phone. "And make sure the cup is actually clean this time." Emma nodded, her smile unwavering despite the unprovoked barb. As she poured his coffee with steady hands, she noticed the storm brewing behind his stern expression, the kind of darkness that comes from carrying invisible burdens. "What can I get you for dinner tonight?" she asked, pen poised above her notepad. What followed was an order so complicated: burger medium rare but not too pink, fries extra crispy but not overcooked, side salad with dressing, but only if the lettuce wasn't wilted, that Emma had to write smaller just to fit it all on a single. But when his food arrived, the performance began in earnest. "This is medium well, not medium rare," Jonathan declared, cutting into a perfectly cooked burger. "And these fries might as well be soggy cardboard. Is incompetence the special of the day?" The elderly couple at the next table exchanged uncomfortable glances. Gus peered through the kitchen window, his face flushed with protective anger for Emma. But she simply took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing with the exhale. "I'm so sorry it's not to your liking, sir. I'll have Gus prepare a fresh one right away," she responded, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. 3 times his meal was remade. 3 times, Emma carried it to his table with the same patient smile. The diner had emptied completely by the time Jonathan finally picked at his 3rd burger, still finding fault with each bite. "You know," he said, looking directly at Emma for the first time, "most waitresses would have spat in my food by now." Something in his tone suggested he was almost disappointed she hadn't. "That wouldn't solve anything," Emma replied softly, refilling his water without being asked. "And it certainly wouldn't make your day any better." For just a moment, Jonathan's carefully constructed mask of irritation slipped, revealing something unexpected, surprise, perhaps even a flicker of shame. He quickly recovered, demanding the check with renewed sharpness. As Emma placed the bill on his table, their fingers briefly touched. In that fleeting connection, she felt an inexplicable certainty that this difficult customer carried sorrows far heavier than her own. What Emma couldn't know as Jonathan left without a tip was that her small acts of kindness toward a stranger determined to be unkind had set in motion events that would soon change both their lives forever. Golden afternoon light slanted through the blinds of the Bluebird diner, creating dancing patterns across the worn linoleum floor. For 3 consecutive days, Jonathan Miller had appeared at precisely 5:47 p.m., choosing the same corner booth where the sunset cast long shadows. For 3 consecutive days, Emma Matthews had weathered the storm of his impossible demands with the steady resilience of a lighthouse against crashing waves. "This soup is cold," Jonathan declared, pushing away a steaming bowl that sent visible wisps of heat into the air around him. His voice carried across the half-full diner, causing several regular customers to exchange knowing glances. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Miller," Emma replied, her voice carrying the same genuine warmth she offered to her kindest customers. "I'll have the kitchen warm it up right away." As she carried the perfectly hot soup back to the kitchen, she caught the eye of Marlene, the diner's manager, who stood arms crossed by the register. The older woman's expression was a blend of concern and irritation as she beckoned Emma over with a subtle nod. "Emma, honey," Marlene whispered, her weathered hand gently touching Emma's shoulder. "You don't have to take this from him. I've been watching this performance for days now. Say the word and I'll ask him not to come back." The overhead lights illuminated the tired lines around Marlene's eyes, eyes that had seen decades of difficult customers come and go, but few as deliberately challenging as Jonathan Miller. "It's all right," Emma assured her, already reaching for a fresh soup bowl. "He's not hurting anyone." "He's hurting you with all this nonsense," Marlene countered, but there was something like admiration in her tone. 20 minutes later, Jonathan was inspecting his club sandwich as though searching for evidence at a crime scene. "The toast is burnt on one corner," he announced, his fingers adjusting his perfectly knotted tie. In the kitchen, Patty, the newest waitress, rolled her eyes dramatically. "What's his problem anyway? Daddy didn't hug him enough as a child?" She snickered, loud enough for the kitchen staff to hear, but not quite reaching the dining area. Or maybe his wife left him for someone who doesn't act like he's got a silver spoon stuck somewhere uncomfortable. Gus chuckled reluctantly while plating another order, but Emma's face remained thoughtful as she prepared a fresh sandwich. "Everyone has bad days," she said quietly, arranging the pickle garnish with care. "Some people just have them more often than others." "Bad days?" Patty scoffed. "That man's having a bad life and making it everyone else's problem." Emma's eyes lifted, meeting Patty's with unexpected intensity. "We don't know what he's carrying," she said simply. "Sometimes the rudest people are fighting the hardest battles." Later, as Emma delivered the fifth iteration of Jonathan's perfect sandwich, she noticed something she hadn't seen before: a worn photograph peeking from his expensive wallet. A woman's face, partially visible, with eyes that somehow reminded Emma of Jonathan's, despite their warmth. For a fleeting moment, as Jonathan absently touched the edge of the photograph before tucking it away, Emma glimpsed vulnerability beneath his armor of disdain. In that unguarded second, she understood with absolute certainty that her kindness wasn't being wasted. It was being tested against the weight of someone else's grief. As she turned away, she never saw Jonathan watching her retreating form, his expression softening into something close to wonder. The evening rush had faded into the gentle lull that always preceded closing time at the Bluebird Diner. Outside, streetlights flickered to life one by one, like stars being carefully placed in the deepening twilight. Emma wiped down the counter, with circular motions, her muscles operating on memory, while her mind wandered to tomorrow's bills and Liam's upcoming science competition. Jonathan Miller's booth sat empty now. His departure had been as abrupt as his arrival. No goodbye, no acknowledgement of the countless reheated meals or replacement beverages Emma had brought him throughout the evening. Just the scrape of his chair, the crisp rustle of his expensive coat, and the firm click of the door closing behind him. "Good riddance," muttered Patty, passing by with a tub of dirty dishes. "Maybe we'll get lucky, and his car won't start tomorrow." Emma offered a tired smile but said nothing as she approached the corner booth to clear away the aftermath of Jonathan's visit. The table looked like a battlefield: crumpled napkins, half-empty water glasses with fingerprints marking their surfaces, and breadcrumbs scattered like abandoned soldiers across the worn formica. As she began stacking plates, something caught her eye: a $5 bill tucked partially beneath the salt shaker. For the hours he'd occupied the booth, the endless demands and remade orders, it was barely enough to be considered a tip at all. Emma sighed softly, not from disappointment, but from a quiet confirmation of what she'd already suspected about the man. Then she noticed it: a folded piece of paper beneath the bill. Not the diner's receipt, but something torn from a small notebook. Emma hesitated before picking it up, her fingertips brushing against the expensive paper. In precise, elegant handwriting were the words, "Kindness isn't always appreciated, but it's always noticed." Emma read the message twice, then a third time, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. She glanced toward the door as though Jonathan might still be there, watching her reaction, but saw only her own reflection in the darkened glass. "What's that?" Marlene asked, appearing at Emma's shoulder. "Just a note," Emma replied, slipping it into her apron pocket before she could examine why she wanted to keep it private, and a small tip. Marlene snorted. "Figures. All that trouble and he leaves pocket change. Some people have no shame. Emma nodded absently, but her thoughts had already drifted to the mysterious message. Was it an apology, a test, or something else entirely? The handwriting revealed a steadiness that contradicted the chaotic behavior she'd witnessed for days. As she finished her closing duties, refilling ketchup bottles, checking salt shakers, counting her meager tips, Emma found her hand returning to her pocket, fingers tracing the edges of the folded note as though it might contain answers to questions she hadn't even formed yet. Later, as she walked home beneath a sky scattered with distant stars, Emma dismissed the strange encounter from her mind. Jonathan Miller was just another difficult customer in a long line of difficult customers. The note was probably nothing. A moment of guilt, perhaps, or some kind of bizarre game wealthy people played with service workers. By tomorrow, she was certain he would be forgotten. Just another face in the parade of strangers who passed through the diner doors each day. But as she fell asleep that night, the words echoed in her mind like a melody she couldn't quite place. Kindness isn't always appreciated, but it's always noticed. Morning light filtered through the threadbare curtains of Emma's apartment as she rushed to prepare Liam's lunch. Her fingers, still tender from yesterday's burns, moved with practiced efficiency, spreading peanut butter across wheat bread in perfect, even strokes. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly forward, a constant reminder of another day's battle against time. "Don't forget your calculus notebook," Emma called out, tucking a handwritten note of encouragement beside the sandwich. These small gestures were her way of being present even when her endless shifts kept her physically absent. The shrill ring of her phone cut through the morning routine like an unexpected thunderclap. Unknown number, city area code. Emma hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Bill collectors rarely called this early, but caution had become second nature in her financially precarious world. "Hello?" she answered, voice guarded as she balanced the phone between ear and shoulder. "Is this Emma Matthews?" The voice on the other end was crisp and professional, the kind that belonged in gleaming skyscrapers, not calling small-town waitresses at 7 in the morning. "Yes, this is she," Emma replied, mouthing, "Go brush your teeth," to Liam as he appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. "This is Cassandra Wilson, executive assistant at Orion Enterprises. I'm calling to schedule an interview for the executive assistant position. Would tomorrow at 2 p.m. work for your schedule?" Emma's mind raced through possibilities, each more confusing than the last. Orion Enterprises, the company whose towering headquarters dominated the city skyline 40 miles away, whose name appeared on everything from tech innovations to philanthropic initiatives. "I think there's been a mistake," Emma said carefully. "I never applied for a position with Orion." A momentary pause. "According to our records, your application was processed yesterday evening. The CEO specifically requested we fast-track your interview." "The CEO?" Emma's gaze drifted to the window, where the distant factory smokestacks stood like sentinels against the morning sky. What game was being played here? Who would submit an application in her name? "Ms. Matthews, are you still there?" "Yes, sorry," Emma replied, mind whirling. "Tomorrow at 2 p.m. you said?" "That's correct. 15th floor, Orion Tower. The receptionist will direct you. Dress code is business professional." After hanging up, Emma stood motionless in her small kitchen, morning sunlight catching the dust particles that danced in the air around her. "Business professional," words that belonged to a different world than her diner uniform and sensible shoes. "Everything okay?" Liam asked, concern etching his young face. Emma forced a smile. "Yes, just unexpected news. I might need to borrow Mrs. Hendrick's blazer for tomorrow." Later, as she tied her apron at the Bluebird Diner, Emma found herself scanning the booths for Jonathan Miller's stern face. The corner booth remained empty all morning, but his absence felt strangely significant, like a puzzle piece deliberately removed. As she refilled coffee cups and delivered plates of steaming breakfast, one question echoed in her mind. What kind of cosmic coincidence could connect a difficult customer's cryptic note, a mysterious job application, and a company whose name represented the stars themselves? Tomorrow at 2 p.m. she would step into an unfamiliar world to find answers. And perhaps, though she dared not hope too much, something that might finally change the well-worn path her life had followed for too long. The Orion Tower pierced the sky like a silver needle threading through clouds, its glass exterior reflecting the world in distorted magnificence. Emma Matthews stood at its base, her borrowed blazer slightly too large at the shoulders, her one pair of dress shoes freshly polished yet visibly worn. The revolving door before her seemed to spin between two different realities, the familiar world she inhabited and something altogether unknown. Inside, the marble lobby stretched before her like an ocean of polished stone. Emma's heartbeat echoed in her ears as she approached the reception desk, each step a whispered reminder that she didn't belong among the confident professionals striding purposefully across the vast space. "Emma Matthews," she said softly to the impeccably dressed receptionist. "I have an interview at 2 p.m. 15th floor, came the reply, accompanied by a pristine visitor badge. "Miss Wilson is expecting you." The elevator ascended with silent efficiency, each floor ticking away like seconds counting down to an inevitable revelation. Emma studied her reflection in the mirrored walls, hair neatly arranged, borrowed clothes carefully pressed, eyes bright with uncertainty and determination intertwined. "Miss Matthews, welcome to Orion Enterprises." Cassandra Wilson, tall and elegant in a tailored suit, greeted Emma with a firm handshake. "The CEO will see you now." "The CEO?" Emma echoed, confusion blooming anew. "I thought this was an assistant interview." Cassandra's smile revealed nothing as she guided Emma down a corridor lined with award plaques and artistic photographs of global landmarks. They stopped before an imposing oak door bearing a simple nameplate. "Jonathan Miller, Chief Executive Officer." "Right this way," Cassandra said, opening the door to a spacious office where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a living painting. And there, silhouetted against the breathtaking view, stood a figure whose profile Emma had memorized. Over days of serving endless cups of coffee and repeatedly rejected meals. "Thank you, Cassandra," said a voice Emma recognized immediately, though it lacked the sharp edge she had come to expect. As the door closed softly behind her, Jonathan Miller turned, his expression unreadable, as he studied the woman standing before him. "You," Emma whispered, the single word carrying a universe of questions. "Me," Jonathan confirmed, his posture relaxed in a way it never had been at the diner. "Please sit down, Miss Matthews." Emma remained standing, her mind racing to reconcile the demanding diner patron with the man before her now, confident, composed, and clearly in his element among the trappings of extraordinary wealth and power. "You're the CEO," she stated, pieces falling into place with dizzying speed. The rude customer, that was all an act. Jonathan gestured toward a leather chair. Not an act, a test. A test, Emma repeated, the words tasting strange on her tongue. You were testing me? Why? Because finding someone who treats people with dignity when they're at their worst is infinitely more valuable than finding someone who's pleasant only when it's easy. Jonathan's eyes held none of the contempt she'd witnessed at the diner, only clear, focused interest. Anyone can be kind to a billionaire CEO, Emma. Few remain kind to someone they believe is just a difficult customer with no power to affect their lives. The vast office suddenly seemed too small to contain the implications of his words. Through the window behind him, Emma could see the distant outline of her town, where the Bluebird Diner continued serving customers without her, a world away from this moment of truth suspended in the clouds. So all of it, the complaints, the demands, was the most honest job interview you'll ever experience, Jonathan completed, a hint of a smile finally warming his features. And you passed with flying colors. The afternoon sun cast long golden rays through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jonathan Miller's office, illuminating dust particles that danced like tiny stars in the space between them. Emma stood perfectly still, her mind struggling to process the revelation that had just upended her understanding of the past few days. "Please, sit," Jonathan said again, his voice gentle in a way she had never heard at the diner. This time, Emma complied, sinking into a chair that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. Jonathan moved away from the commanding view of the city skyline and settled into the chair across from her, removing the invisible barrier of authority that his standing position had created. For the first time, Emma noticed the subtle signs of exhaustion etched around his eyes, a humanity that had been carefully concealed beneath his performance as the impossible customer. 6 months ago, he began, his fingers interlaced in his lap. I lost someone very dear to me, my sister Rebecca. His gaze drifted momentarily to a silver-framed photograph on his desk that Emma couldn't quite see. She spent her life reminding me that true wealth isn't measured in acquisitions or achievements, but in how we treat others when there's nothing to gain. The office fell silent except for the distant hum of the building's sophisticated systems. Outside, clouds drifted across the vast expanse of blue, casting moving shadows across the cityscape below. After she passed, I established the Rebecca Miller Foundation, dedicated to creating opportunities for people who embody the values she cherished: compassion, integrity, resilience. But I quickly discovered something troubling. Jonathan leaned forward slightly. When people know they're being evaluated by a billionaire CEO, they present only their most polished selves. The true character remains hidden. Emma's fingers unconsciously touched the edge of her borrowed blazer. So you became the difficult customer. I became the person no one would want to impress, Jonathan corrected with a slight nod. I've visited 17 different establishments over the past 3 months. Do you know how many people show genuine kindness in the face of deliberate provocation? The question hung in the air between them. 3, he continued before she could answer. 3 people out of hundreds, and you, Emma Matthews, were the most extraordinary of them all. A flush of warmth spread across Emma's cheeks. I was just doing my job. No, Jonathan said with sudden intensity. You were doing far more than your job. You defended me when others mocked me. You maintained your dignity when I offered none. You saw humanity where others saw only irritation. Those aren't job requirements, they're character revelations. He stood and walked to a sleek sideboard, returning with a blue folder embossed with the Orion logo. "I don't just need employees with impressive resumes, Emma. I need people whose internal compass points true, even when no one is watching. People who understand that great achievement begins with how we treat the least powerful person in the room." Jonathan placed the folder before her. Inside is an offer, not just for a job, but for a full university scholarship for both you and your brother Liam. Emma's breath caught. "How did you—" "I make it my business to know who I'm investing in," he replied simply. "You've been fighting extraordinary battles with quiet grace for years. Now I'm offering you the opportunity to fight different battles alongside me, not for me." As Emma's trembling fingers reached for the folder, the late afternoon light caught the tears gathering in her eyes, transforming them into prisms of possibility and hope. Golden hour light streamed through the vast windows of Jonathan's office, bathing the room in a dreamlike glow that made everything, including the moment itself, feel surreal to Emma. The blue folder lay open before her, revealing numbers that seemed to belong to someone else's life story. Her eyes traced the zeros, unable to fully comprehend that they represented a potential new reality. "This can't be right," Emma whispered, her finger hovering over the salary figure, an amount that exceeded her annual earnings at the Bluebird diner by multiples she couldn't quickly calculate. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, studying her with quiet intensity. "It's not only right, it's actually conservative for the position I'm offering." "Hospitality Management Director," Emma read aloud, the title feeling foreign on her tongue. "But I'm just a waitress." "No," Jonathan said firmly, rising to pour water from a crystal decanter into 2 glasses. "You're someone who understands that true hospitality isn't about perfect service. It's about perfect sincerity. That's a distinction most corporate executives never grasp." He handed her a glass, the cool surface grounding her in a moment that threatened to slip into fantasy. "My company operates conference centers in 12 countries. We host leaders from every industry. What they remember isn't the thread count of the linens or the precision of the table settings. It's how they felt in our care. Outside the window, the city began its transition to evening, lights flickering on one by one like earthbound stars. So different from the view outside the diner's windows, where streetlights buzzed to life on the same quiet corner every night. "With this salary," Emma began, her voice barely audible, "Liam could attend any college. We could move somewhere with better schools. I could finally pay off our parents' medical debt." Jonathan nodded, his expression softening. "All true, but those are just the practical changes." "What do you mean?" "I mean that financial security is only the beginning," he replied. "This position would take you around the world. You'd be designing experiences that shape how global leaders interact. Your perspective, one forged through genuine struggle and maintained with remarkable grace, is precisely what's missing in these rarefied environments." Emma set the water glass down, her hand trembling slightly. The enormity of the shift before her suddenly felt overwhelming, like standing at the edge of a vast ocean after a lifetime beside a familiar pond. "I don't know if I'm qualified," she admitted, years of self-doubt surfacing despite her best efforts. "I've never even been on an airplane. 10 years ago, I was selling homemade software out of a garage," Jonathan replied. "Qualifications grow with opportunity. What can't be taught is the intuitive understanding of human dignity you demonstrated every time I tested your patience." He leaned forward, his gaze direct and unwavering. The world is full of skilled people, Emma. What it lacks are individuals who remember to see the person behind the position, whether they're serving coffee or running nations. As twilight deepened outside, Emma found herself at the crossroads of two possible futures, one well-worn and predictable, the other unknowable but luminous with possibility. The weight of responsibility for Liam, the comfort of familiar routines, the fear of reaching beyond her perceived limitations, all balanced against a door suddenly flung open to a world she'd only glimpsed through others' stories. "How soon would you need an answer?" she asked finally, her voice steadier than she felt. Jonathan smiled, a genuine expression she had never seen during his diner performances. "Take the weekend. Some decisions deserve their own moment of reflection." The bus ride home from Orion Tower stretched longer than the actual 40 minutes it took, each mile a pendulum swing between exhilaration and terror in Emma's mind. Outside the grimy window, the landscape gradually transformed from gleaming skyscrapers to familiar industrial sprawl, a visual reminder of the vast distance between her current life and the one Jonathan Miller had just offered. The blue folder sat heavy in her worn backpack, its contents almost burning through the fabric. With possibility, Emma's fingers unconsciously traced the edge of her borrowed blazer, still struggling to reconcile the woman who had stood in that towering office with the waitress who would wake at dawn tomorrow to serve pancakes and pour coffee. Night had fallen. By the time Emma climbed the 3 flights of stairs to their apartment, her footsteps echoing in the narrow stairwell. The sound of rapid keyboard clicking greeted her as she pushed open the door to find Liam hunched over his second-hand laptop, the blue light illuminating his concentrated expression. "You're back," he exclaimed, swiveling in his chair. Then, noticing her unusual attire, "How was the mysterious interview? Did you find out who set it up?" Emma set her bag down carefully, as though the papers inside might dissolve if handled too roughly. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." 20 minutes later, the siblings sat cross-legged on their small sofa, the contents of the blue folder spread across their coffee table like a map to an undiscovered country. Liam's eyes were wide with disbelief as Emma recounted her encounter with Jonathan Miller. "So the jerk customer was actually a billionaire CEO testing your kindness?" Liam shook his head in amazement. "That's literally the plot of like every inspiring YouTube video ever." "I know it sounds impossible," Emma sighed, running her fingers through her hair, now freed from its interview-appropriate styling. "But it happened. And now, this offer." "This isn't just an offer, Em," Liam said, pointing to the salary figure. "This is everything you've been working for since Mom and Dad died." "This is terrifying," Emma finished, voicing the fear that had been building since she first saw Jonathan behind that massive desk. "What if I can't do it? What if I'm completely out of my depth? I don't have a college degree. I don't know anything about corporate culture or international business or—" "Stop," Liam interrupted, his teenage face suddenly serious beyond his years. "You've been managing impossible situations since you were 19. You think running a hospitality department is harder than keeping us afloat after the accident? Than negotiating with debt collectors while working double shifts? Than somehow making Christmas happen even when our electricity was shut off?" In the gentle lamplight of their modest living room, Emma saw for the first time how her younger brother had been watching her all these years, not just as a caretaker, but as a model of quiet strength. "You've spent your whole life taking care of others, Em," Liam continued, his voice softening. The diner customers, your co-workers, me. You've always lifted people up. Maybe it's time someone lifts you up too. Emma's eyes filled with unexpected tears as Liam reached across the coffee table to squeeze her hand, the same hands that had packed his lunches, checked his homework, and worked countless hours to keep their small family intact. "What if I fail?" she whispered, the question containing all her deepest fears. "What if you fly?" Liam countered, his young face alight with a hope that reflected what she had always tried to nurture in him. "Besides, you've never failed at anything." That truly mattered. As midnight approached, the siblings remained on the sofa, surrounded by the paper promises of a different future, while outside their window, stars illuminated possibilities that had seemed unreachable just one day before. The polished marble hallways of Orion Enterprises echoed with Emma's footsteps as she made her way to her office each morning, the sound a constant reminder of how far she had traveled from the worn linoleum of the Bluebird Diner. 2 months. Into her role as hospitality management director, the novelty had faded, but the weight of scrutiny had not. In the sleek glass conference room, Emma felt the sidelong glances during her presentations, silent evaluations from colleagues with prestigious degrees framed on their walls and family connections etched into their surnames. Their smiles never quite reached their eyes when she spoke, their questions thinly veiled challenges wrapped in corporate politeness. "Interesting approach, Emma," remarked Vivian Chen, the razor-sharp marketing VP, after Emma's proposal for the Singapore conference. "Though perhaps a bit provincial. Not all cultures respond to that level of personal attention." The words hung in the air like frost, met with subtle nods from others around the table. Emma felt her cheeks warm but maintained her composure, responding with the quiet confidence that had carried her through countless difficult shifts at the diner. "Actually," she replied, opening a folder of research she'd compiled during late nights at her new desk, "studies show that authentic hospitality transcends cultural divides when delivered with genuine respect. I've prepared some case studies if you'd like to review them." Long after the executive floor emptied each evening, Emma's office light remained on, a solitary beacon against the darkened skyline. She devoured industry publications, enrolled in online courses, and practiced presentations in front of her bathroom mirror. Weekends became territories conquered by determination, as she transformed her lack of formal education into a strength rather than a liability. "You don't have to prove yourself by working 20-hour days," Jonathan observed one evening, appearing in her doorway as she reviewed guest satisfaction metrics from their Tokyo location. Emma looked up, shadows of exhaustion visible beneath her eyes. "I'm not proving myself to others," she answered with quiet certainty. "I'm proving to myself that your faith wasn't misplaced." In the 3rd month, Emma's opportunity arrived with the crisis no one saw coming. A last-minute venue cancellation for their flagship European conference, with just 72 hours to secure an alternative. While the executive team spiraled into panic-driven debates, Emma quietly made calls to connections she'd cultivated, leveraging the genuine relationships that were second nature to someone who'd spent years remembering customers' coffee preferences and life stories. "It's handled," she announced simply at the emergency meeting the following morning, sliding the details of a superior replacement venue across the table. "The transition will be seamless for attendees." Stunned silence followed, broken by Jonathan's approving nod from the head of the table. Vivian Chen studied Emma with new eyes across the polished surface, reassessment visible in her expression. In the weeks that followed, Emma's phone began to ring with internal calls seeking her input, her calendar filled with lunch invitations from colleagues whose earlier dismissal had transformed into cautious respect. The whispers in hallways shifted from the waitress to the miracle worker as each successful project cemented her position. From his corner office, Jonathan observed her transformation not with surprise but with satisfaction. He'd seen in a diner what others were only beginning to recognize in boardrooms: that true excellence isn't born from privilege or pedigree, but from the resilience forged in life's most challenging moments. As Emma confidently led the quarterly planning meeting, her voice clear and assured where it had once been hesitant, Jonathan smiled to himself. Some investments yielded returns that couldn't be measured on balance sheets, but in the unmistakable flowering of human potential. The grand ballroom of the Hartwell Hotel glowed with amber light, the murmur of conversation rising and falling like gentle waves against a shore. 1 year had passed since Emma Matthews had first stepped into the imposing Orion Tower, with borrowed courage and a second-hand blazer. Now she stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as executives from across the globe mingled at the conference she had orchestrated down to the smallest detail. "The feedback scores are unprecedented," whispered Vivian Chen, appearing at Emma's side with a tablet displaying graphs that traced an unmistakable upward trajectory. 98% satisfaction rating. Even the Japanese delegation, who never give perfect scores, rated the experience as exceptional. Emma smiled, her gaze drifting across the room to where a young server carefully arranged appetizers on a silver tray. Earlier that day, Emma had noticed the girl's hands trembling slightly during setup and had taken a moment to speak with her, learning about her night classes and the grandmother she supported. A brief connection, invisible to most, but one that reminded Emma daily of her own journey. "It's not about the thread count or the menu," Emma replied softly. "It's about making people feel seen." What had begun as Emma's radical proposal 3 months earlier, to hire service staff from struggling communities and provide them with training, fair wages, and advancement opportunities, had transformed into Orion's most successful hospitality initiative. The authentic care these employees brought to their work created an atmosphere that no amount of luxury alone could achieve. As the evening progressed, Emma felt a presence beside her and turned to find Jonathan Miller observing the room with quiet satisfaction. "Walk with me?" he suggested, gesturing toward the terrace doors. Outside, the city sprawled before them in a tapestry of lights, each one representing lives interconnected in ways both visible and hidden. The night air carried the first hint of autumn, a gentle reminder of seasons changing and cycles continuing. "When I first met you," Jonathan began, his tone reflective, "I believed I was the one offering an opportunity. I see now that you've given Orion something far more valuable than what we've given you." Emma shook her head slightly. "You changed my life, and Liam's. He starts college next month. And you've changed the culture of a global corporation," Jonathan countered. "Do you realize that 3 other departments have adopted your hiring model? The board is tracking the metrics closely. Turns out, giving people dignity creates loyalty that no compensation package can match." He turned to face her directly, the city lights illuminating the sincerity in his expression. "You proved that kindness isn't weakness, it's a strength, one that transforms not just individuals but entire systems." From his inside pocket, Jonathan withdrew an envelope embossed with the Orion logo. Which is why the board has approved my proposal to create a new division, Orion Community Initiatives, a department focused on replicating your model across all our properties globally with complete autonomy and a dedicated budget. Emma's breath caught as she accepted the envelope, her fingers no longer bearing the burns and calluses of diner work, but now marked by the confident grip of someone who had found her purpose. "We're offering you the leadership position," Jonathan continued, "because who better to lift others up than someone who knows exactly how heavy the climb can be?" As a cool breeze carried the distant sounds of the city upward, Emma thought of all the invisible workers whose daily kindnesses went unnoticed. The bus drivers, the janitors, the waitresses refilling coffee cups with genuine smiles despite aching feet. She thought of herself a year ago, never imagining that treating a difficult customer with dignity would lead to this moment of transformation. "I accept," she said simply, her voice carrying the quiet power of someone who had finally found where her journey had been leading all along. The bell above the Bluebird Diner's door chimed with familiar melody as Emma Matthews stepped inside, the sound transporting her across the 2 years that had passed since she last stood on this worn linoleum floor. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the same checkered curtains, casting honeyed patterns across tables where countless stories had unfolded, including her own. Emma smoothed her tailored suit, a subtle gesture betraying the surreal feeling of returning to the place where she had poured thousands of cups of coffee and countless hours of herself. Her eyes found the corner booth, his booth, now occupied by a young couple sharing a slice of pie, oblivious to how that particular spot had altered the trajectory of lives. "Still the best coffee in town?" asked a familiar voice behind her. Emma turned to find Marlene, the diner's longtime manager, her lined face breaking into an expression of delight and disbelief. "Emma Matthews, look at you!" Marlene exclaimed, embracing her former waitress. "When Liam told us about your fancy job, we couldn't believe it. Though if anyone deserved a break, it was you." As they caught up, Emma noticed a young woman hurrying between tables, her movements revealing the same graceful efficiency Emma had once perfected. The waitress's name tag read Sophia, and beneath her professional smile, Emma recognized the subtle signs of exhaustion she knew intimately. The careful calculation of tips, the momentary wince when shifting weight to a sore foot. "New girl?" Emma asked quietly. "Single mother, 2 kids, working through community college," Marlene replied, following her gaze. "Reminds me of someone I used to know." Emma nodded, understanding flowing between them like a current. "Is my old booth available?" Seated by the window, where she had first encountered Jonathan Miller, Emma ordered coffee and watched the rhythms of the diner unfold around her. Sophia approached with a steaming cup, apologizing for a small delay with genuine concern that transcended customer service training. "No rush at all," Emma assured her with a warmth that momentarily surprised the young waitress. The bell chimed again, and Jonathan entered, his expensive coat and confident bearing drawing curious glances from the regular patrons. Yet as he slid into the booth across from Emma, he carried none of the artificial displeasure he had feigned during their first encounters. "Feels like another lifetime," he remarked, glancing around the humble establishment that had been the unlikely catalyst for their shared journey. "And yet exactly the same," Emma responded, watching as Sophia juggled orders with determined grace. When their simple meal concluded, Emma placed her corporate card on the bill. But before Sophia could process it, She added a handwritten note and a personal check that would cover 3 months of rent for the struggling waitress. "What did you write?" Jonathan asked as they prepared to leave. Emma smiled, remembering the note that had once mystified her. Kindness isn't always appreciated, but it's always noticed, and sometimes it changes everything. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot where Emma had once counted tips with weary fingers. Now she stood straight-backed beside the man who had seen potential where others saw only a waitress. 2 years ago, I thought success meant escaping this place, she confessed, gazing back at the diner's weathered exterior. Now I understand it's about remembering where you came from and reaching back to lift others forward. Jonathan nodded, the understanding between them deeper than words could express. That's why you're leading our global community initiative. Not because you rose from waitress to executive, but because you never forgot what it means to be either. As they walked toward their waiting car, Emma glanced back one last time at the Bluebird diner, where Sophia was discovering the note and check with widening eyes. The circle completed itself in that moment, a reminder that true wealth wasn't measured in corporate titles or bank accounts, but in the ripples of kindness set in motion across lives touched and transformed. In that quiet parking lot where her journey had begun with an unexpected note, Emma realized the most valuable lesson of all. In a world that often celebrated power and privilege, the most profound impact came from simply seeing the humanity in every person who crossed your path, whether they carried a serving tray or a corporate portfolio. Some tests in life came with clear answers. Others revealed truths that could only be understood by living them. For Emma Matthews, the answer had always been kindness, not as a means to an end, but as the very purpose of the journey itself.